Hello and welcome to episode 17 of the 1001 Movies podcast. In this episode, I'll be talking about Bernardo Bertolucci's 1972 film, Last Tango in Paris. And a word of caution, by the way, because of the subject matter of the film, this episode may not be appropriate for sensitive listeners.
You know, on the top of the closet, cardboard box, I found all your little goodies. Pens, keychains, foreign money, French sticklers, the whole shot. Even a clergyman's collar. I didn't know you collected all those little knickknacks left behind. Even if a husband lives 200 fucking years, he's never going to be able to discover his wife's real nature. I mean, I might be able to comprehend the universe, but I'll never discover the truth about you. Never. I mean, who the hell were you? Remember that day? The first day I was there. I knew that I couldn't get into your pants unless I said, what did I say? Oh, yes. May I have my bill, please? I have to leave. Remember? Last night I ripped off the lights on your mother. And the whole joint went bananas. All your guests, as you used to call them. Well, I guess that includes me, doesn't it? Huh? It does include me, doesn't it? For 5 years, I was more a guest in this fucking flophouse than a husband. With privileges, of course.
If you were to mention Last Tango in Paris to anyone old enough to have heard of the movie, whether they've seen it or not, they'd probably say something about Marlon Brando and butter. The film's reputation as erotica precedes its merits, although in today's culture, in which films and books like 50 Shades of Grey are consumed by millions, it would unlikely ruffle the feathers of most moviegoers today, even with its NC-17 rating. The plot is straightforward, and beware, here there be spoilers. Middle-aged Paul, played by Marlon Brando, is living in Paris and mourning the recent suicide of his wife. He meets young Jean, played by Maria Schneider, and the two begin an affair. Since Jean is engaged to a self-absorbed filmmaker, and Paul wants to keep the relationship strictly within the four walls of a rented flat, their sometimes savage lovemaking takes place there. Things come to a head when Paul reaches an epiphany and wants to elevate the relationship beyond just sex, and like many classic love stories, it ends in tragedy in the closing scene, when Jean shoots him dead. As with last week's examination of The Man with the Golden Arm, the critical success of Last Tango in Paris can be credited to two men, its director, Bernardo Bertolucci, and its lead actor, Marlon Brando. Bertolucci's career began as an assistant, Pier Paolo Pasolini, and he made his first film in 1962, La Camera Secca, which was written by Pasolini. Bertolucci's films, many of which he scripted, focused on the existential predicaments of people who find themselves thrust into situations which force them to cope with dramatic changes in their lives. For instance, his 1964 film Prima della Rivoluzione is about a boy coping with his best friend's suicide by beginning an affair with a woman, and both of them know it can never last. It's obviously a plot similar to that of Last Tango of Paris. He was known primarily for The Conformist and The Spider's Stratagem, both released in 1970, before really striking critical gold with Last Tango in Paris 2 years later. Marlon Brando, of course, had already made quite a name for himself with his good looks and excellent acting chops. He had quickly risen as a member of Hollywood royalty for his performances in A Streetcar Named Desire in 1951, Viva Zapata in 1952, and On the Waterfront in 1954, for which he won an Oscar. Brando's success couldn't last long, and he was distracted from acting by his struggling family life and his involvement in the civil rights movement. He made a handful of films in the 1960s that failed miserably, and his career nearly fizzled out. 1972 turned out to be a good year for him, however. This was when he starred as Vito Corleone in The Godfather, earning him his second Oscar and rebooting his career. Last Tango in Paris, which was released in 1972 but didn't receive immediate international distribution until 2 years later, gave him another boost and earned him another Oscar nomination. Casting Brando as the melancholy Paul in Last Tango in Paris seems apropos. He was quickly earning a reputation as a washed-up Hollywood has-been, the perfect actor to play a bitter, cuckolded widow who plunges himself into an affair with a younger woman. He is brilliant in the role. Paul is not only melancholic, but relishes in treating others with disdain. In the opening moments of the film, he's seen cursing at the noise of a passing train. He proactively insults his grieving mother-in-law, turning the lights off and shaking her in the dark. He grieves over the corpse of his dead wife as she's laid out for mourning, then calls her a whore in a dozen different ways before sadly trying to wipe off her makeup. Perhaps his most interesting moment outside of his affair with Jean is his frank confrontation with his wife's grieving lover. Paul doesn't confront him, but seemingly resigns himself to accept the fact of his wife's indiscretion. Paul's only comfort lies in the apartment he and Jean make love, where he reminisces about his days as a boy and flirts playfully. As the film's reputation promises, some of their lovemaking is extreme, and Paul's anger and sadness come out in his own form of sexual expression. He savagely informs Jean during one of their sessions that he wants to have intercourse with a pig while she eats its vomit. And yes, there is the infamous butter scene in which Paul rapes Jean with 2 fingers dipped in butter while climbing on top of her and shouting insults at her. This scene was improvised by Brando with Bertolucci's knowledge, although actress Maria Schneider had no idea of what was going to happen. The tears she sheds in the scene are actually genuine. Bertolucci found inspiration in the work of painter Francis Bacon, and the opening credits of the film take place over 2 of Bacon's works. Bacon was known for his distorted and sometimes disturbing images of people. There are several scenes in the film in which Bertolucci mimics his style. A maid's face is distorted through opaque glass as she cleans up the bloody bathtub where Paul's wife's body was found. A frustrated older prostitute, her face covered with absurd makeup, turns and nearly looks into the lens of the camera. A woman removes her false teeth in a public bathroom, and the apartment concierge communicates with Jean by shouting through a distorted window. Bertolucci also makes deft use of camera movements, such as the opening in which Jean and Paul pass each other on the street. The camera sweeps down upon Paul at first, then follows the 2 characters, switching from one to the other in an open space, not unlike the titular dance, the tango. Bertolucci received an Oscar nomination for Best Director for his work in the film. Now, despite the critical success of this movie, there was some fallout resulting from Last Tango in Paris, primarily as a result of the infamous butter scene. Maria Schneider never spoke to Bertolucci again as a result of the scene, and some say it triggered her career as an advocate for women's rights. Brando felt manipulated by Bertolucci as well, and refused to speak to him for years after filming. But Bertolucci's biggest problem was his prosecution in an Italian court as a result of the butter scene. He was sentenced to a 4-month term in prison and a 5-year suspension of his civil rights. The court ordered all prints of the film destroyed and was probably later distributed internationally and later on DVD because Bertolucci had kept a copy hidden away. What did I think of it? Watching this film was not, I have to admit, a pleasant experience. It delivers visually, and Marlon Brando's performance was superb, but I could not help but be bothered by the not-so-subtle misogyny. Rape scene aside, Jean's character is churned through an emotional meat grinder. Her fiancé sees her simply as an object for a film, and he follows her with a camera crew everywhere. Even he physically abuses her. She consents to marry him, all the while enjoying the savage pleasure of allowing Paul to take advantage of her. I realize that all of this appropriately culminates in her shooting Paul dead, but I still could not help but think that after the credits finished rolling, Jean will likely not come out on top of her situation. Not only was she an object of abuse, but now she's a murderer as well. This film will, I suspect, take a second or even a third viewing for me to appreciate it, but it's really difficult to appreciate a film when one of the lead characters goes through what Jean did. Needless to say, this one is not going to be on my rewatch list anytime soon. The best thing to come out of it is Marlon Brando's superb performance, and probably his best that I've seen, and The Godfather remains one of my favorite movies of all time. Now, that's all I have to say about Last Tango in Paris. Join me next time when we talk about the 1994 French film Wild Reeds, directed by André Tichny. Also, please follow me on Twitter at 1001moviespc, or you can reach out to me via email at 1001moviespodcast@gmail.com. And finally, if you are enjoying the podcast, by all means, please leave some friendly feedback on iTunes to help us get more listeners out there. Thank you, and see you all next time.